Hello and welcome back to another lesson in class. Now, before we get into this, just think about this for a second. We went over about three or four good lessons within spirituality, and we're going to understand that all the lessons build upon each other, as well as how the title plays into everything else. So, welcome to lesson 45, Spirituality, the Unexplained Science that we call magic or refer to sometimes. And if you are an individual that likes to hide in plain sight, well, hello, so do I. Point number one, tying the title down to the first point. Do you remember the story of Moses? Well, in the story of Moses, because we're talking about spirituality, and many people can relate to that story because of, well, Charlton Heston and the movies and the TV shows, etc. But in there was a little magic off that occurred, right, between Moses and the magicians of the court for Egypt. Now, when that occurred, obviously, it got to the point where they had to throw their staffs down, turned into snakes. Moses threw his down, etc. And of course, you know what happened. Moses' staff devoured the other two, right? So think about it this, right? If the Asclepius and the Catechus went to battle, the Asclepius would devour the Catechus. Does that make sense? The Catechus, which is on almost every American hospital, but the Asclepius, World Health Organization, or WHO, right? Sounds like an owl's gesture, right? WHO, right? Would devour that, right? So think about that and think about what was said in the title, right? Spirituality, the unexplained science that we call magic, right? So hold that into your mind and let's get into the second point here. And if you're getting anything out of these lessons, go ahead and smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with your friends. I'm sure they'll find this interesting. So, point number two, using other lore, mythology, whatever, right? I'm going to take the character of Merlin, and let's say he showed up with, at a magic competition, looking like everybody else, etc., doing his thing. But at this competition, you had people like Banachek, you had DB, Darren Brown, and David Blaine, right? Then you had Chris Angel, Penn and Teller, even people that were interesting, like P.T. Barnum would be there, right? To see these feats and everything else. What would you think they would do or say? Would they study him, report him, analyze him, etc., speak about it to everybody? Understanding history repeats itself, and they normally get rid of people like that. I mean, in the movie Superman, the army took him into custody at one point thinking that he was a threat. He let them take him, and at one point I think he actually broke his handcuffs just to show that he was doing exactly what they wanted the whole time, because he could have escaped whenever he wanted to, right? So think about that, right? With the first point, right, thinking of Moses and the story of the Bible and everything that happened there, because remember, they kept asking for proof. Oh, if this is so powerful, do this. If this is so powerful, blah, 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 blah. And it kept snowballing, right? Would the same thing happen at a magic competition in the real world or with anything else, right? Because, well, people don't know when to stop until it's time to stop. And we'll get to that in a second. Now, in point three, if you heard me speak of SDK, which is the martial arts style that I'm developing in homage to, well, JKD, The Way of the Intercepting Fist by Bruce Lee, and combining my little tech nerd background, because SDK is how you get applications to integrate and get along, similar as you hopefully one day get children to get along, right? Both males, females, whatever they're calling themselves these days, right? And in there, we have a rank structure. And one of these rank structures is BPM, right? And that has a certain color and everything attached to it, just like in martial arts. But it's a combination of things, right? Because it's a little bit higher ranking than, well, let's just say when you first start out. And BPMs to the medical community would be your beats per minute. Speaking of which, let me check my microphone. Seems like we're doing good so far. So let's continue. So beats per minute, right? If you've seen the Apple Watch, the Aura Ring, so on and so forth, it can track your heart rate, right? And you can also do this wirelessly as well, but in order to have cheaper products on the market that can do the same thing, they have to sometimes physically touch you, right? However, it tracks your nervous system, other stuff, It's kind of cool, right? Kind of futuristic. And then, of course, imagine if somebody can monitor brainwaves. Well, you got CAT scans and everything else, but imagine if you can also do that wirelessly. You can also track not only the central nervous system, but the heart rate, see if somebody's lying on a polygraph, or see if they're lying in general, or manipulate them. Think about that, like a magic trick, controlling them like puppets. It's crazy, but it does exist, and the technology is out there. You just have to seek, and thou shalt find, as they say. So check your emotions at the door is another word for BPM or phrase, right? Watch your BPMs, right? Watch your heart rate, watch your temper, because an elevated temper elevates the heart rate, central nervous system signals, outputs, etc., right? And we're going to get into a lot of depth here. So in point 3, watch your BPMs and ask yourself this question: why is there a round table and what did it mean? Right? So I mentioned Moses, I mentioned Merlin, but now I'm mentioning the round table, which comes from King Arthur. Obviously, I told you this builds upon everything, right? As do the points. So hold that in your mind and ask yourself, if you don't know, you can pause right here, take a minute and ask Google or whatever, what was the meaning of the round table, or what did it symbolize, right? So going into point 4, we have turn the other cheek, benefit of doubt, self-defense, and a knight's tale. What do all those things have in common? This will be also referred to as a LCD, lowest common denominator, for you math people out there. So think about those things that I just mentioned, right? Turn the other cheek, benefit of doubt, self-defense, and a knight's tale. Two things that I can pull out from, as far as that little cluster right there, is, well, respect and certainty. Now let's Tarantino this and work backwards, right? In A Knight's Tale, Heath Ledger goes undercover as a knight, pretends to be, eventually gains his patents of nobility, or gets deemed a knight in front of everybody through the prince that he jousted with, gains the respect and certainty now because the people got reinforced in a physical, right in front of their face. They can't argue it. They can't contest with it anymore because, well, the prince came out with his knights and knighted him, and without, beyond contestation, so on and so forth, according to his historians. So, I mean, think about that. That not only elevated him, but now gave him certainty that he could compete, that he would go free, and gain the respect that he always wanted, right? And in the movie, you see that, right? And then, of course, you have self-defense. You had Count Adamar, so on and so forth, who was an antagonist. Of course, people would try to damage stuff, or they'll cheat or whatever. Remember, Adamar tipped his spear and then punctured his shoulder, and he couldn't hold up his thing. So he was like, latch that puppy to my arm. I'm going to knock this homeboy out, right? Like if he was One Punch Man or something. But think about it. That's what happened in the movie, right? He cheated. And, they say, and you could hear Mark Cuban say this on Shark Tank, if you're not cheating, you're not trying, right? But what does that mean? And then, of course, you have, well, self-defense, right? I'm going to tell you to stop, but eventually you're going to have to defend yourself, which is exactly what he did when jousting, or anyone else would do. And then, of course, benefit of the doubt, right? Because of turning the other cheek, right? It's explained in a couple ways, but even if you were to, quote unquote, do as it would say, turn the other cheek, so they slap you on one side, they disrespect you, whatever the case may be, you turn the other side, they slap you there, etc. What are you supposed to do next? Doesn't normally hint, but then other people would describe it as forcing the other person to, well, respect you. And then, of course, some people might say stuff out of emotions or anger, so you give them the benefit of the doubt the first time. But once things happen over and over again in a consecutive pattern, well, then things become interesting, right? If somebody were to monitor BPMs, touching back on the last point, doctors don't know what they're looking for. Somebody might call it anxiety. Meanwhile, they had too much caffeine, or they drank 6 cans of NOS energy drinks, and then they're saying that they had a manic episode, and then 24 hours later, they're like, I don't know what happened. Did you check the blood results? Did you check the caffeine levels? Did you see what was going on, or you were just trying to make a buck? Think about it. All right. So the first time I'll turn the other cheek, right? And I normally do this sometimes in fights, etc., right? Because if you see little kids in high school when they fight, once the person gets hit once, everybody, the crowd goes crazy. It works the same way with adults. Watch a UFC fight. Somebody lands the first hit. Oh my God, he hit you, blah, blah, blah. But the fight's not over. The fight just started, right? So you get benefit of the doubt, right? Or turn the other cheek. Okay, you got me, so on and so forth, etc. Or boom, you got me. I'm gonna give you benefit of the doubt that that's not what you meant. Okay, boom. I need you to stop, right? Because now I'm going to have to defend myself. Boom, etc. I'm trying to tell you something without getting in trouble, or trying to say something, but you still want to keep fucking going. So now I want you to latch this puppy to my arm because I'm gonna knock somebody out, right? Like in the movie A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger, right? So remember, from that, you had what? Moses, right? Which got into a magic competition. If Merlin showed up at a magic competition with other magicians there, what would happen? What would they do, etc.? Watch your BPMs, etc., your temper, your emotions, yada yada. What's the purpose of a round table, right? And now I'm speaking of a knight's tale, and at the round table, Arthur sat with his knights. Moving into point number 5. Now, what does the military, a round table, a watch, and time have in common? Well, I mean, think about it. Everything has a shot clock, is a military saying, right? But then, of course, the knights sat at the round table, and the knights protected the realm, the domain, the territory, the land that which was possessed by the king, etc., right? And they were a part of the military structure, but they sat together as equals at the round table. Once you graduate boot camp, you are now equals, and you get addressed in a different manner than the manner in which you are being addressed during training. Remember that, and remember it well. So on and so forth. I don't know about the other branches. I do know that in the Marine Corps, you go from recruit to Marine and rank after graduation, and other things, and things that you are told, said, or say to others is different and changes for that very reason, right? Because it's a form of respect and certainty that you know, and you can pick up on what someone is laying down when they are speaking to you in the cool club. All right. So think about that. What does the military, a round table, a watch, and time have in common? Well, I mean, we all do time in the military. Some of us might sound like criminals because they'd be like, how much time did you do? Like we went to prison or something, right? But then, a couple guys that are in specialized places carry a watch, right? They're normally extremely expensive, and that's because, well, it's a tangible asset that can be traded anywhere around the world and recognized by different cultures, right? You carry a Rolex, it's going to have a certain price tag, but it doesn't get looked at the same way like carrying around $10,000 worth of cash, right? So think about that. Why would you wear a nice watch? Well, because it's a tangible asset that can be traded for funds to get your ass out of trouble in the nick of time. No pun intended, right? So think about that. And then, of course, we have, well, the round table and everything else that we tied together. Well, there's respect, there's military, there's training, there's communication, there's brother and sisterhood, etc. And our time is going to come eventually. We just don't know when exactly. So we might as well enjoy the time that we have while we're together. Right? So when you see military people at their balls or ceremonies, they're having a time together with themselves. People in cultures in society, at least civilians, used to do this back in the day, but not so much anymore. We turned into a more so of a individualistic culture in search of our own people based upon status and whatever else social media and other people like to state is the thing that you should be around, because people always want to try to fit in somewhere, right? The sense of belonging is something that's there, right? Now, to round robin back to the Moses story, right? Who were they truly after and in competition with, right? Because Moses essentially, if you want to use militaristic terms, was an asset, right? He was an asset. He wasn't on payroll, if I remember correctly, not till later, because he had to prove some stuff. But he was an asset being utilized on behalf of, as an intermediary between the magicians, the Pharaoh, Moses, and everything else, right? You have God, angels, and all this other stuff within the story, right? Same thing with Merlin. Merlin had Morgana, but then King Arthur, and then all this. King Arthur wouldn't necessarily always fight that person. Merlin would have to step in as an intermediary sometimes, etc. Similar to like an attorney would if someone got in trouble and got put before a judge. So think about that. Who were they actually in competition with? They weren't in competition with Moses per se. Maybe the magicians were, because their life was on the line, because they said to the Pharaoh they could do certain things, but now they are getting their butt kicked by somebody. So you had to ask yourself, oh, it's a battle between kings, like a chess game, right? You have kings on each side, and then they send their troops in, their pawns, their knights, their bishops, their rooks, and their queens to, well, do stuff and duke it out, and then the goal of it is to protect the king, right? Some people would say God save the queen, God save the king, etc., so on and so forth, but they're playing around as such, right? And then of course pawns, the youngins, the pawns in front of the pieces could emulate, well, the children of the court that are now enlisted, or whatever the case may be, that represent the families that they came from, who stand behind them. So you have the rook, and then the pawn in front of the rook, the knight, the bishop, the queen, and king, and they all have pawns, and there's two of each side. So I would take that there's males and females, etc., since they do allow females obviously into the military, and they work together with males. But let's just say they're pieces on the board, because we don't want people to get emotionally distraught, hence the phrase BPMs, and watching them to understand what is going on. So what were they truly upset with, right? When you get onto the battlefield, you're there because you're told to do something, right? You're not there because of your own free will, right? You just decided to show up. Something happened, a chain of events occurred, you got told to do something, you need a paycheck, you swore an allegiance and an oath, or took an oath, so on and so forth. And so therefore, by which you are obligated to carry out certain actions. Now, when you get to that location and those people try to, well, defend the location in which you were just told to attack, that's not just on them and on you, but that comes from, well, either not asking enough questions, or not asking questions at all, and just doing your job, which is normally expected. But what if you can have communication? Because before something ever got too out of control, there was always people that would speak and come to terms as far as a negotiation would be concerned, before things got extremely crazy, that is, right? So what do I mean? All right, so when I talked about BPMs and everything else, and then of course the commonalities, well, remember in the beginning I also discussed other stuff, like how does this language transfer over? And we talked about Harry Potter language and other language, so on and so forth. Now, I also mentioned Merlin at a magic competition, Moses, but I wanted to educate you on things like DARPA, which is the Advanced Research Projects, so on and so forth, right? Because if you saw some of the things that they are capable of, would you call it magic or science? And why is that, right? See, if you were able to monitor someone's behavior or control it, right, to see how far they would go. In law, I know because I just came from a public law library, I had to pull up a dictionary to explain this to people. You have something known as a dangerous proximity test, right? Or this means someone is close to completing an offense, right? Or contemplating or completing an offense, right? According to definition within Black's Law Dictionary, right? This is what attorneys would study in order to speak upon your behalf within litigation or a discussion or a whatever, right? Then you have dangerous tendency test. Right? An example of this would be dog bites, right? They're an example that the owner can be held liable for the actions caused by the dog because they did not either train the dog or they did train the dog and the dog decided to attack, right? Now you combine this with other things that we were discussing and you will understand that there's a connection here, and I'll let you figure that one out within the comment section. But I mean, think about it. If this was occurring, what would we call it in our language, right? Because we don't ask questions, but there is a law, right? Whether it's in spirituality, on land, with humans, whatever, there's always laws and rules, right? Regulations. And the color of law, which is a phrase, right? The misuse of power made possible because the wrongdoer is clothed with the authority of the state. And if you remember past videos, I stated that people only act confident or a certain way when they, know that somebody's got their back and all this other stuff, right? They know all this jargon. I got my boys with me, blah, blah, blah. So it's easy to go and take apart one person's individual life and destroy everything because you work with the masses, right? Or you deem as such until something else were to occur, hence the analogy of Merlin with other magicians, Moses showing up in the court, and then trying to understand lowest common denominator with, well, time, right? So color of law, and they do these, right? Because if you say that, oh, they don't have tests to see how dangerous someone is, if you ever heard of the marshmallow test, because people wanted to know how patient one can be before receiving an award, then you understand that psychologists and other people out there conduct tests all the time, right? So if someone says the phrase, this is colorable, that means, or can be translated to, by definition from the dictionary, intended to deceive or be as, well, counterfeit, right? So color alteration is another phrase that they like to utilize. And then, of course, one last thing before I hop back into the lesson and the other points, there is albus libre, right? And it's referred to as the White Book, which is an ancient book containing the laws and customs of the city of London. Why is this important? Well, if you live in North Carolina, you know about Chester, Lancaster, and Durham. And if you're an attorney, you can pretty much explain that to everybody else. But if you're not an attorney, but you're a student or whatever, find one, ask them some questions. Why do UK laws? What was the King Charles Act? What does Lancaster, Durham, and Chester have anything to do with North Carolina? And all that. So let's jump back into the lesson now, right? So we got through the first couple points here, and that was what? We're on point 7. So if meaning and symbols are for all to see who are in search of meaning, then why are people still asleep? Right? Think about it. If people are in search of meaning, Dr. Jordan Peterson, right? And there's signs, symbols, and everything else. A stop sign, a triangle, a crosswalk, railroad crossing, traffic lights, etc. Why are people still asleep? And then, of course, the next point after that, or question I would actually ask, which would be question number 8, is what is the difference between awake and woke, right? Oh, we're living in woke culture, right? Woke culture. And then, of course, they want to cancel people, right? And then, of course, you can say neutralize, right? And these are all different phrases, right? But then you go to awake to see if somebody is still awake and not sleeping, right? Lazarus, right? So has he been awoken or is he asleep? I don't know. Let's host a wake and see what happens, right? I know these terminologies and phrases sound odd, but they make sense once you put the perspectives together and you create the mind and prompt it a certain way. Let's do a mic check. All right, we're still good. So moving forward, right? So why are people still asleep? What's the difference between awake and woke, right? And then, of course, people will say, oh, cancel this person. That person built everything, but it's really easy to destroy stuff, and then they take their time trying to give things back. So weird, right? Now, think about this because of all the stuff that's been happening with freedom of speech and First Amendment rights and all that. Do words have power or meaning? If so, how? I mean, Martin Luther King got shot for opening up his mouth. Lord knows that if they don't want you to do something or say something, they can quickly cancel you, like Andrew Tate or anybody else. And if they really have a problem with you, you'll end up like Charlie Kirk because of, well, emotions. That's literally what it comes down to. And this is my place, and you're going to do, and aquí, I rule this area, or at least they have the assumption that they do. And, I would ask them the phrase drill instructors say to us sometimes is, oh, so you think you made it, right? This is your land. So you made this, right? You did this. You built that. You created that, right? Give me a break. So, I mean, think about it, right? If words have power or meaning, do they? If so, how? Put that in the comments. Put your answers there. I'd love to hear them, right? And then why do some people, and this is going to get a little sensitive, so I want to go into this, right? Why do some people only cry in the shower or when it rains, right? Were they told that people don't cry? Were they forced a certain mindset or psychology to not feel any pain, or because they have PTSD or whatever the case may be, but they're told not to cry, so they do it in private, right? And people wait for that to occur so they can register what is ID known as pain, or see what is depression, etc., and why tears are coming from one's face, right? Now, let's talk about something else outside of that now that we asked that question, right? Understanding that peacekeeping troops, right? What is that? What does that mean? Right? They were to prevent two groups or villages from fighting each other. Now, mind you, I got this from the Black's Law Dictionary, along with a couple other places because I was at a library. Check my freaking status if you want to. And then I took some notes because, God forbid, people go to a library and take notes, right? So, did you know that the Peace Corps that was established in 1961 became an independent entity in 1988? The mission is to help train, promote better understanding for those Americans whom help others understand other people around the world. Weird, right? And then, of course, you have your peacekeeping troops. Well, what are peacekeepers? They are like the referees on the field, right? When people get out of control, we got to stop these two people, these two families, these two cultures, this so on and so forth from killing each other, right? Etc. So think about that, because I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can't intervene with, and you got people that probably do that kind of work that would cry in their apartment and ask, why won't you let me help this person? And then they get told, go back, try again, or stay away. They actually don't want help, whatever the case may be. So, what is, well, let's continue. Let's just stop right there. Let's continue, right? So the last thing we stated was, why do some people cry in the shower or when it rains, right? Now let's go into this. This is pretty interesting here, right? So we have, if belief can be a part of the magic that saves the life of those who deserve it, right? Can it, how do I say this? I don't care if I get in trouble right now. If belief can be a part of the magic that saves the life of those who deserve and can be saved, why not pierce the veil, right? Especially in the United States, right? Now, piercing the corporate veil in the United States is a legal term within the context of business and spirituality, dropping the cloth, seeing what else is out there, right? In other cultures, revealing certain things in order to bring light or joy or energy back into someone's body, showing them what's possible, similar to what a magic trick does, since magicians show people what is possible, which is why the Pharaoh relied upon his magicians to explain certain things, and then of course Moses in the same context, right? Now, When it comes to the United States, especially in the United States, there's certain things that can happen, right? But when you pierce the corporate veil, what does that mean? Well, in this case, it holds the business owner personally liable for the debt, right? For the debt of what it owns, right? In this case, it would be the United States debt, which is a business, by the way, just like everything else that has shareholders, right? So if you share equity within that company, you would hold those individuals by piercing the corporate veil directly and personally accountable. You wouldn't put it on the people. You wouldn't put it, right? Remember the movie Troy or the book The Iliad, right? Where Achilles looks back and says, imagine a day that kings fought their own battles. Wouldn't that be a sight to see, right? Or wouldn't that be the day, right? The only person that gets annotated outside within that culture is Leonidas within Sparta, right? Because he was one of the leaders that decided to go out there and do more than just send somebody else, right? So on and so forth. So think about that. What happens, right? Because the United States has a lot of debt right now, and they're putting a lot of people in debt. But what if the steaks that people wanted to taste so much, especially a particular individual that decided to say that to me on the phone, the roles got reversed, right? And now they are held personally liable for all the debt that they've accumulated. I mean, well, if they wanted to keep making themselves richer along with everything else, and then, of course, utilizing language when it's beneficial to them, but if it's going to do anything else or harm their reputation because it might be the, well, quote unquote, truth, why not pierce the corporate veil, put everything on the table? Let's stop finagling and have everybody that's been making so much money and then explaining, just keep trying, because that's how you have to feed the machine of, well, belief that one day they will make it, just like in the school system. Get a degree and you'll maybe get a decent salary or a good job, right? Which has been proven false for a lot of people, but it does get them into debt and they can't get rid of it. So keep trying, keep giving money to other people, and maybe one day you'll get it, right? If they were to pierce the corporate veil, people such as the World Bank, IMF, a couple other entities, even the Rothschilds would have to step in, right? Because they're shareholders and they have equity within countries and land, etc. And if that were the case, what do you think they would do? See, because I was mentored by Dr. Walter Johnston, former Marine Corps Raider, sniper, trainer as well, former Gideon, and he was the one that actually brought me to the Marine Corps recruiting office when I was younger, who was a doctor of finance, if I remember correctly, who was a CFO for Lexington, Kentucky banking, and he was one of the individuals that would chop the heads of the people held directly responsible for the destruction, collapse, and or the fact that the business was going under, couldn't pay their money back to the bank, and well, he would reestablish the board of directors, i.e. the people who sit at the table, to use another reference, so on and so forth, right? All right, microphone's still working. So he would literally go to the table, the board of directors, those in power that should know better, and say, I want you all to, well, brush up and refresh your CVs. It's kind of like an enhanced version of a resume. And I only got to see this once growing up, but it was amazing. It was like somebody got out of control and grandpa came in, slapped daddy, and then grandma came in and slapped mommy, and they were like, fix this or we will replace them with the grandchildren, so on and so forth. And nobody's saying anything because it's something that, well, they got out of control, they didn't know what they were doing. Now we got to call in the old timers. Darren Brown would refer to this as the pensioners, and the chairman of the board came and just slapped somebody in the face, or the actual owner came in and slapped somebody in the face like the chairman of the board, and be like, what's going on? That's an example, but let's continue. You get the gist of it, right? So moving on to the next point, can the uninformed be informed and still be incorrect? Well, if they have limited knowledge, if they're quick to judge and make statements without understanding, they may receive a piece of information, but not everything, because they don't want to hear the context or the content. They just want to hear keywords. So they'll feel informed, but then when they speak, they're uninformed, which is so interesting, right? If you know everything that I'm doing, right, and you're telling me and warning me, what do you know that you're still not saying to other people since you know so much? Check yourself. Because there's other people in the room that know what you know, that I know, that you know. You know? And been there, done that. Vet gang, right? But then they have other ones, right? If you know, you know. So what do you know, and how much do you know that you're not saying to other people, but you're pointing out to others for some reason? Are you trying to feel cool? Are you being dumb? Or do you want people to start coming to your place, not just of business, but in your own personal life, and questioning you? How do you know so much information? Why did you say these things? Who put you in that position? Are you someone's asset? Did you hire your friend that was in the Air Force that retired, so on and so forth, and started his own business and try to play a little game, and because they had to pull strings and everything else? Were you employed by the state to do such? Are you employed by the military? What are you doing about the actual human trafficking that's going around, especially that which resides with children? Because there's so many signs of it all over the place, unless that's another illusion. So before you want to dime somebody out or say something or spread false or fictitious lore and give somebody a label to depict them a certain way, to play a psychological operation, but then again, how do you know so much? How do you have so much power? And why haven't you called upon whatever it is that you're speaking to, right, to assist with that instead of making one's life a living hell? So, is it true that time reveals all, right? So, they say patience is a virtue and all these other things. But remember, Stephen Covey, you have to listen to understand instead of listening to fucking respond. Now, that's called taboo language, and most people don't study Sigmund Freud, so they don't understand taboo language. So when they hear the fuck you word every once in a while, it trickles the brain, right? It tickles it, trickles it, messes up the electrical signals, because you heard a key word that makes you, let's call it defensive, right? So you want to now start responding instead of trying to fucking understand what's being said. So does time reveal all? Well, I mean, think about it. If you are told you're going to get stronger by going to the gym, and that's true, yes. But once you start stacking that over and over again, and you start playing with other things like people's time, energy, and attention, right? You got to take people's time. That's how you get them to work or study or do anything. They need energy in order to do so. And then, of course, in order to focus, you need their attention. Now, what does psychology, magic, air, and sociology have in common, right? Right. So if you know this, go ahead and put it in the comments. But I have air in there, right? Why is that? Well, because sometimes, just like psychology, magic too is invisible, right? And what is psychology but the study of the invisible? Because you cannot physically see what's inside somebody's mind unless you utilize technology in order to acquire that information, have some strategic line of questioning, utilize, pattern recognition, study the specimen, right? Because they like to play scientists, so I'll use their lingo, study their specimen very well in order to understand the invisible. Sociological will be groups of people. This is what marketers do for a living, by the way. We study your language, we understand how to speak to you, and we try to help businesses. Not all of us are good, but then again, there's always a 50-50 chance, right? So the invisible is what they have in common, right? So let's talk about some other stuff revolving around this, right? So quantum merit Merit or merit or whatever. It's Meruit, right? It's Latin for as much as he has deserved. Reasonable value of services, damages awarded for services rendered, right? If somebody helped you out with stuff, if somebody did a service, uh, love languages, acts of service is in there. What's the what's going to be returned, right? Not to have expectation, but think about it, right? Because there's also Gary Vaynerchuk, and he talks about don't go in with expectation, right? But in law, they have the expectation of privacy, a belief in the expectancy of the right to be free of governmental intrusion in regard to, well, a particular place or thing, right? And then, of course, that's false. That would be duplicity, right? Because somebody can make up a lie. Oh, this person's a spy, enact Title 50. Now we don't have to follow the rules because we enacted Title 50. And this person is literally doing what he hears on TV or this, that, and the third. He's acting suspicious. I have too many questions. I need somebody to sign a warrant so I could do some stuff that's going to probably piss people off. Might backfire, but let's see, right? So, what was interesting, right? Because I talked about piercing the veil. Now, there are movies out there and things like that. And something that I found very interesting in the law dictionary was the term fallen angel, right? Which is a slang term, but it means a company, institution, or borrower whose credit worthiness has significantly declined, right? So they talk about the debt and the credit and all this other stuff, but in business it's backwards because remember Tower of Babel, you have to confuse the language or else they'll be like others. So personal, you have debits and credits, and in business you have debt and credit, so on and so forth. The United States happens to be a company and or organization. And then of course they're in debt because the US debt total is so large. Now, what happens when their credit worthiness is significantly declined? If you're an individual, well, you're not good for any more credit. So what you're going to do, you're going to print up fake money, more money, you're going to hand out money, you're going to try to do something, whatever the case may be, but it's not, you know, going in a proper direction. And then you have the movie Angel Has Fallen or Fallen Angel with Gerard Butler, where the president and there's a whole thing there. So you got to look at those things because of what's happening not just around you but in society and media and, well, understanding what is being stated, right? So you have things that are also being stated, right? Because now you have the whole issue with ICE and stuff like that. You have hate crimes, which is in there. And then, of course, you have what's it called, certain things, right? So what are they isolating, right? Or should I say what is known as seclusion, right? And seclusion, which I have notes here because not everybody goes to the library or whatever, is a tort, not a constitutional violation, meaning people will spy on you, stalk you, invade private spaces, record you with or without consent. But in the dictionary it says without consent. If there's a warrant signed, then they don't need consent, they'll just do it. Like what Magneto said in X-Men, they'll just do it. They won't ask for permission, right? And then, of course, you have the Fourth Amendment privacy zone, right? This pertains to what happens in one's home. But if they have a warrant and everything else, they can see what's going on in your home because you gave them permission or some judge signed off on it. God forbid we do that to the judges that make so much money off of other things like the politicians. Don't get me started on Nancy Pelosi because there's a great connection between her being married to a stockbroker and then, of course, well, that's not illegal, but Martha Stewart went to jail for insider trading. So the Fourth Amendment privacy zone, right? Privacy zone pertains to what happens in one's home, your apartment, whatever. But if they put you in someone else's house, that person can give privilege or whatever or access, right? But if you have your own apartment, this could be manipulated if the person is deemed or accused of being, well, a spy, a traitor, so on and so forth, enacting Title 50, etc. Meaning, I got 5 on it, everybody stay silent, we're going to break a lot of things, but it's okay. The judge signed off on it because we convinced her as such, right? When this includes religious liberty. The First Amendment gets involved as well because freedom of religion, expression, and speech, along with a couple other things, are categorized underneath the First Amendment if you were to do your research. But most people don't even know who Thomas Paine is. So it's so weird because people go to Germany and they say, oh, Germany is going to help this, that, and the third. And then I say, Germany uses francs. And they say, what's a franc? Glad you asked, because in the Black's Law Dictionary, a member of the Germanic people who conquered the Gauls, right? Franc, right? A mark for postage as a substitute. The privilege of sending certain mail free of charge. That's so weird. So weird. And then, of course, we have a rule that came out in 1964. But then again, they also say that faith and trust is identified as flim flam. Look at confidence game. And that's in the Black's Law Dictionary. So please do your research and come correct and understand what you're saying before it comes out of your mouth. Now, moving into the last 6 points here. Remember, what does psychology, magic, air, sociology have in common? Now imagine this trend, this pattern, and this line of questioning has been occurring during this whole lesson, right? The knight's table, a watch, the military, so on and so forth. What does everything have in common that I'm stating in this lesson, because the lessons build up upon each other, right? Last 6. Is thought invisible? Well, I mean, if freedom of speech and all this other stuff is going to get violated, who's to say that they won't invade your thoughts? Don't think about that. Don't do that, etc. I already know my algorithm says you're going to do something bad. Because why? Because you're going to make it happen. You saw the domino effect. You can see into the multiverse with different variables. Or are you controlling every single scenario so that somebody carries out an action similar to a Manchurian Candidate or something of that sort? And Darren Brown can give you a simple explanation that you can watch on YouTube completely for free thanks to, well, hypnosis, magic, and Google. Moving on. Can you share a thought? Of course you can share a thought, right? But do you do that with communication? Do you do that with facial expressions? Do you do that with different lingo, jargon, terminology, etc., right? You see a Harry Potter movie, that was an awesome movie. I like the part where, they talk about mischief managed and, they were building Dumbledore's army and all that. And then the story of the Deathly Hallows. Or you could go to a museum and utilize that language in a different, vernacular in a different space, but people still understand what you are stating, right? So yeah, you can share a thought, just like you could pass in notes in class. All right. So is the pen mightier than the sword? If so, how? Remember, words, which is normally written with a pencil or pen, if you take the S and put it into the front, it becomes sword, right? Now, if your words have power and meaning, which was, well, a question earlier in this lesson, well, then you can utilize your words as a sword. Let me do a mic check here. We're still good. So you can utilize your words as a sword, right? To either pierce the heart, make someone emotionally distraught, upset them, use taboo language, practice verbal martial arts, etc., in order to do certain things or to get people to act a certain way. This would be sometimes known as witchcraft or tradecraft or neurolinguistic programming or magic if you're a magician, falling underneath mentalism. Mentalism goes with, well, Hermetic principles as well, and you can look into that with a simple ChatGPT, Gemini, or Google search. So is the pen mightier than the sword? See, I had a student that I just elevated, and I gave him a pen that was kind of like this. Not this color, though. And I told him, I said, no matter how dark your path is, hopefully you'll always have a light to guide you. Now, Knox. Now, I said Knox as I turned it off because I mentioned Harry Potter. Remember when they say Loomis, right? Their wand would light up, etc. If I was a doctor and I was testing pupil dilation, I would bring the light, follow the light up, down here, across, up, down here. All right. And then they would come close, etc. And then they say, okay, good. Pupil dilation is great, etc. Now, law enforcement can utilize this as well as a sobriety test, or doctors may do this to check if the eyes are working correctly, to make sure that the iris is flexing in such a manner, responding to the aperture or focal points like a camera lens, right? So it's just to see certain responses, right? Now, these are all clues that are given to a doctor when being utilized correctly in order to determine what is the situation, label, analysis, and what's going to be the outcome for treatment, right? Or the treatment plan. So they will utilize the pen or the light, so on and so forth. But this can also be a self-defense tool, so on and so forth, right? Because if they got close enough and you thought that person was a doctor, right? Because if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, thanks to social engineering, and they're wearing the right uniform, and they have, well, the backing of, well, the state or government, whatever, they can pretend to be doing all this. And because it's like martial arts, right? There is a staff that has red horsehair right at the end, and the light acts as such. So they can get as close as possible. And what happens if they jab it into your eye? Now you can't see. Remember the children's rhyme, right? Are you sure you're lying? No, 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 no. Stick a needle in your eye, right? Stick a needle in your eye. Weird. But it's true. It was said once. It does happen if they do test the vision that way. So, who's to say why not? Right? Now, round robin back to, do words have meaning or power? Well, I just did that, right? Based upon things that I stated, the words that I dictated, and everything else. How were your BPMs, if you remember that? Did you get emotionally triggered? If so, were you aware of it because you're awake, right? Or have you been awake, right? Or you woke because you've been awake for so long, right? And so you've lived life, right? So you got a little devil inside of you, because devil's lived spelled backwards. So, I mean, what is it? Oh, I'm going to teach this person a lesson, not 11, sorry, a lesson, right? I lived life, etc., blah, 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 blah. Now he's pulling out the law. And if they pierce the corporate veil, it's going to be an issue for everybody. Moving on to the last 2 points here. And I did this at a bar, and I said this in other videos, and I'm going to say this here. Does a dollar bill have value? What, and if so, why? Right? See, you have a $100 bill, has some artwork on it, has a cool face, so on and so forth. 2 extra zeros means it's worth more, right? But with a simple dollar bill that you can place on a table, right? If you fold it and place it in front of somebody with the back facing them, and you point to it, you can actually see what it is that they don't like, understand, or care for, right? Not understanding what it is that the dollar bill represents. See, the dollar bill also represents the individual that is also looking at it, because it's a single person, it's a single thing, it's a single object, right? There's nothing else dictating that there's more to it, but there's a lot within it, right? Like the back of a dollar bill. People only know one side of you, but if they got to know you, they would learn so much more. So I'm going to show you a dollar bill, and I'm going to point to the back of it, right? And there's, well, an eagle, there's this, there's arrows, there's stars, there's "In God We Trust," there's a pyramid, there's an eye, there's the United States, there's the color of it, so on and so forth, the color of it. And if somebody says that they don't care, well, what don't they care about? Well, if they say God, that's one thing, but what about all the other stuff? Does that matter? Okay, that's fine. What about if I turn it around now, right? So I turn it around and you see the president on the front, George Washington, right? Very well known. He's put on a dollar bill, probably because of, well, if you're in marketing, this would be known as brand awareness. You want to know who the first president is, so you put them on a $1 bill. It gets circulated quite often, and people will know whom that person is. But if they say that they don't care about that, then what do they care about? Because they got upset with everything. So are you willing to give yourself up so that others can strive and live a better life? Since that which you deem not as valuable because you don't care about it, would you give it to somebody else? Would you give up your possessions that you bought with that thing that you said that you don't care about, that's written on paper with words that come with other words because you needs to be identified to you as being valuable or as an object of trade similar to a watch? So if I handed you a book with words in it, would it be deemed as valuable because of the words that are written on paper? Would it be worth the number that it's suggested for, like a price tag, right? Or would you say you don't care about it like a dollar bill, but you'll cross the street or run into the middle of one for $100 bill that has less artwork, less identifying factors, but represents more because, well, you can look at things sociologically. And that can only get you but so far. And that's the same thing that happens not only in business but in medicine as well. But if you want to solve an individual person's problem, you have to look at it from a psychological and holistic standpoint, meaning to focus on that one individual, like the $1 bill. Think about it. Now, the last point, and this is point 20, and there's always a connection between the title and points, numbers, etc. Right? Now remember, you can change the language, you can't change numbers. Think about that. So if one has value, do podcasts provide value? If so, why? Right? Because they're providing information, they're upholding the freedom of speech. But if they're getting strong armed or whatever, or forced into a position to, well, carry out this psyop, as they want to call it now, or whatever the case may be, whom do we trust? Whom do we listen to? And whom do we believe? Whom do we trust? Whom do we listen to? And whom do we believe? Think about it. Because is there a disconnect from the individual when you meet them in person versus what you see on camera? Remember, the brain can't tell the difference of the time that you spend with an individual, whether it's on camera or in person, right? This is why when you see your favorite stars or whatever, you feel like you know them, but you only know a part of them, similar to the example with the dollar bill, individual $100 bill, so on and so forth. You do so much for the $100 bill, what they view as valuable, the person with a lot of followers. You do so much for that, right? Because they have gravitas, clout, bravado, whatever the case may be. And you'll do so little for the $1 bill that you won't even care about it until it's gone or it pertains to you. So this has been lesson 45 in class: spirituality, the unexplained, science, that which we sometimes call magic, and, well, refer to sometimes, as they say, right? And if you haven't, here's a clue. See, 4 and 5, I went to a shooting range. This guy was trying to hit on a girl. I was showing her with smaller caliber. And he's like, why do you have her with a 9? You know, she can handle a 45. I said, it still comes out to 9. He didn't get the joke. But if you multiply 4 times 5, it'll come out to 20. There were 20 points in this lesson for you. And just like at the range, at the gym, and everywhere else, listen to understand, not respond. So I'm looking forward to not only seeing what you guys have to say, if you guys say anything at all, but seeing how things unfold as we get closer to the end of, well, spirituality within class. I mean, this was lesson 45. The next is 46, and that's over the hump number in mathematics. And yeah, so until next time, my friends, take care. God bless. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.